Deep in the red center of Australia, a rail worker is sleeping soundly behind a closed compartment door, while a mile of loaded wagons thunders across open desert at track speed. 3 vehicles forward, somebody else has the controls. The nearest township lies 600 kilometers down the line. Nobody involved considers any of this unusual. Cross the Pacific, though, and the same arrangement becomes illegal because American federal statute forbids a crew member from taking rest aboard a goods train that is underway. 2 nations, 2 enormous rail systems, 2 opposite conclusions drawn from one identical problem. Here are 10 reasons Australia builds bedrooms into its freight consists, and 10 reasons the United States never managed to. Number 10. Inside the sleeping van. Start with the hardware, because the object itself explains a great deal. Viewed from trackside, one of these vehicles reads as a retired passenger coach, and that impression is usually accurate. Most of them began life hauling ticketed travelers. Open the door and the interior tells a different story. Imagine the sleeper cab of a road freighter, then stretch it out to full carriage length. Crew members get their own enclosed berths, 4 of them as a rule, each fitted with a genuine mattress and a lamp for reading. Past the berths, you find a communal sitting room, a galley carrying a cooktop, a microwave oven, and a fridge, plus a washroom where the shower actually runs. Add machines for washing clothes, a diesel generator supplying power, and air conditioning throughout, since the mercury on the Nullarbor Plain regularly climbs beyond 40 degrees Celsius once summer arrives. Nothing in the fit-out is indulgent. Every square meter serves one objective: delivering a driver to the controls in good enough condition to run a locomotive safely when the rotation calls their name. Positioning matters too. The van rides immediately behind the power units, or at most a handful of wagons deeper into the rake, so whoever is coming on shift can walk forward and reach the cab without delay. The arrangement operates around the clock along some of the loneliest railway corridors on the planet. Number 9. The geography of nothing. Grasping why one country needs sleeping cars while the other shrugs them off means looking past raw distance to a sharper question. What lies in between? Rails link Sydney with Perth across something north of 4,300 kilometers. Put into American terms, that is comparable to running from New York City through to Los Angeles. Now the detail that flips the entire comparison. A container train crossing the United States rolls through Chicago, then Kansas City, then Albuquerque, and past dozens of lesser towns besides, every one of them a candidate relief point complete with lodging, meals, and staffed facilities. Head west out of Port Augusta on the Australian corridor, and the next community of any consequence at all is Kalgoorlie, roughly 1,600 kilometers further on. Filling the gap is the Nullarbor Plain, a limestone tabletop that runs flat to the edge of vision in every direction, carrying a section of the Trans-Australian Railway that holds 478 kilometers without a single curve, the longest tangent track anywhere on Earth. Nothing interrupts the skyline. No roadhouse waits beside the ballast. The country supplies 0 facilities for swapping out an exhausted crew, for the plain reason that across most of that span, nobody lives. Number 8. A continent stitched from mismatched rail. The Australian freight system never grew organically into one coherent national network. It was assembled after the fact from half a dozen colonial railways that had never been intended to meet. Track building got underway across the colonies during the 1850s, and each administration selected its own rail spacing without consulting the others. New South Wales went with the British standard. Victoria and South Australia both preferred the broader Irish dimension. Tasmania, Queensland, and Western Australia opted for something narrower, reasoning it would keep costs down through awkward country. Just how badly could that play out? The nation ended up with 3 mutually incompatible widths, and the fallout would shadow Australian railways for the following 100 years. The moment the Melbourne and Sydney lines finally joined at Albury in 1883, travelers were obliged to leave one train, cross a platform on foot, and climb aboard a second. Goods fared worse. Every crate came out of one set of wagons by hand and went into another. Australia was operating 14 distinct break-of-gauge sites by the outbreak of the Second World War. Across the war years, laborers physically transferred in excess of 1,800,000 tons of cargo at those choke points, and staffing the operation took upwards of 1,600 people. Tim Fisher, once Deputy Prime Minister and a devoted railwayman his entire life, summed the mess up as a veritable confetti of gauges, and pointed out that 22 separate track widths had appeared somewhere in the country at one time or another. This went well past annoyance. It rewrote the commercial logic of moving cargo in Australia. For decades, ships working the coastline carried the bulk of interstate tonnage, purely because putting freight on a vessel beat unloading and reloading it at every colonial frontier. So when standard gauge long-haul corridors were eventually pushed through, the spacing between places capable of relieving a crew was vast. The network had been laid out to feed short colonial runs into seaports, never to carry trains across a continent. Sleeping vans arrived as the answer to a difficulty the gauge fiasco had manufactured generations earlier. Number 7. The line, and the train that fed it. Construction on the railway that ultimately made crew vans unavoidable ran from 1912 to 1917, tying Port Augusta, up in South Australia, to Kalgoorlie in the west. Gangs advanced from either end at the same time, driving steel across the Nullarbor under conditions that challenged every conventional idea about railway building. 40 degrees was an ordinary summer reading. Any settled town lay hundreds of kilometers to the rear of the advancing railheads. The labor force occupied camps mounted on wheels that crept forward as the formation extended, and their supplies arrived once a week aboard a service everyone came to call the tea and sugar train. Long after the final spike went in, that provisioning run kept operating, calling at the small maintenance outposts that had taken root beside the line. Cook, whose population topped out near 40 souls, existed for no reason other than servicing the railway. Isolation ran so deep that this weekly working carried its own butcher, ran a banking counter, and included a post office among its vehicles. The service lasted from 1915 through to 1996. That same emptiness is what Australian freight still traverses today. The maintenance outposts have largely been abandoned, yet the underlying obstacle has not shifted an inch. Relieving a crew halfway across the Nullarbor remains impossible, because halfway across the Nullarbor there is simply nothing to relieve them at. Number 6. America's answer was a lookout, not a bedroom. While Australian operators worked out how to bed their crews down on rolling trains, the United States produced its own instantly recognizable piece of crew equipment. But it existed to solve a different problem entirely. Rest was never the point. Observation was. From the 1860s forward, a caboose brought up the tail of every American goods train, housing the conductor along with the brakeman and the flagman. That raised roof structure, the cupola, handed the rear crew a sight line down the full consist so they could spot loads working loose, wheel bearings running hot boxes in the trade, and any wagon that had parted company with the rest. Until George Westinghouse patented the automatic air brake in 1869, brakemen were expected to scramble along the roof walks of a moving train and wind on handbrakes by muscle. Their headquarters for that work was the caboose. Yes, it held bunks and a stove, since crews occasionally lived in one for days on a long assignment. The vehicle was nevertheless a rolling office and observation post at bottom, rather than a rest facility. Anyone traveling in it counted as working, eyes on the train, not asleep partway through a rotation. 2 changes killed it. Fresh labor agreements through the 1980s cut crews from 5 or 6 down to a pair, and electronic end-of-train telemetry took over the watching that humans had done. A presidential emergency board instructed the railroads to start withdrawing them in 1982, and inside 10 years the little red car had essentially disappeared from mainline service. The arithmetic behind its removal was brutal by then. Running a caboose in 1980 came to around 92 cents for every mile traveled, so a 1,000-mile trip absorbed close to $1,000 before anybody was paid a wage. One terminal superintendent reckoned his railroad burned $300 daily, simply shunting the things on and off trains in the yards. No crew rest car ever took its place, because sleeping while the wheels turned was never part of American operating philosophy. Stopping was. Number 5. 12 hours, and not a minute more. American statute draws a firm ceiling around how long anybody may work a train. The Hours of Service Act permits no railroad employee to stay on duty beyond 12 consecutive hours. Once that clock runs out, the train gets stopped, secured, and left waiting for relief. Nothing bends. Convenience buys nothing, and there is no route around the limit short of a real emergency, a natural disaster perhaps, or a derailment fouling the main line. The reasoning is hardly mysterious. Tired people at the controls get things wrong, and getting things wrong while hauling hazardous cargo past somebody's front door can end in catastrophe. The Rail Safety Improvement Act, passed in 2008, lengthened the compulsory break after a 12-hour turn from 8 hours to 10, all of it uninterrupted. Management may not make contact with the employee at any point during it, for any purpose whatsoever. And this is exactly where the machinery starts to grind. Suppose the hours expire somewhere unhelpful. Crews are supposed to think far enough ahead that when the limit lands, the train is standing clear of level crossings, control points, and anything else it might obstruct. Get the calculation wrong, or catch enough delay to be pushed past the deadline in a bad spot, and the train halts precisely where it happens to be. They tie the train down, phone for a ride, and sit. The load waits until fresh people show up. There is a piece of slang for the moment the 12 hours run dry. The crew outlaws. It is a heavy word for good reason. The train becomes dead in the section, sitting on mainline capacity and holding up everything behind it until a replacement can be driven out to wherever it stalled. On a busy route, one outlawed working can spread delay right across a division. Australia has its own 12-hour ceiling, but relay operation means the incoming crew is already aboard, asleep in a van sitting a few meters back from the locomotives. As one pair times out, the other walks forward into the cab, and the wheels never stop turning. Number 4. The Relief Shuffle. The American network manages crew rest through a lattice of nominated terminals and change points distributed along each major route. A crew running out of hours is relieved at one of them, and a rested set based there takes the train onward. On paper, it is tidy. In daily practice, it produces a tangled and frequently maddening logistical chain. Reaching a terminal far from home at the end of a 12-hour turn, a crew is driven by taxi or in a company van to a motel the railroad holds under contract. 10 hours of mandatory rest follow, after which the company may summon them back with as little as 2 hours warning. Picture somebody tying up at midnight, resting from 12:30 until 10:30, then trying to get anything done with the remainder of the day, while knowing the phone can ring from 10:30 onward. That unpredictability has soured relations between rail unions and the big carriers for years. Then comes limbo time, the hours burned once a turn has ended, waiting on a deadhead ride home or on the next job. Federal rules cap it at 30 hours a month, though 30 hours of not knowing still accumulates. Those hours register as neither working nor resting, a regulatory no-man's land that organized labor has spent years trying to shrink. Ask the workforce, and they will describe existing permanently on call, seldom certain when the next shift lands, almost never sleeping to any normal human rhythm. Safety campaigns are fond of the words rested and ready, but the architecture of the job frequently pulls the other way. Relay working strips most of that vagueness out. An Australian crew knows precisely when they are back on, because a rotation aboard the train decides it, rather than a telephone call from a dispatcher landing at some hour nobody can predict. Stayed with the countdown this far? Consider subscribing. What this channel digs into is rail engineering, locomotive history, and the untold side of the systems that push freight from one coastline to the other. Number 3. How privatization supplied the fleet. Today's Australian crew van fleet owes its existence largely to two developments that landed in the 1980s and the 1990s. Country passenger services withered across regional Australia, undercut by road transport and by branch lines closing. Simultaneously, the freight sector was broken up and sold off, a process that opened with the founding of National Rail Corporation in 1991 to pull interstate freight under one roof. The overlap handed operators an opening. As passenger timetables were cut back, hundreds of aging carriages sat surplus in state railway yards. New South Wales government stock, Victorian vehicles and South Australian coaching carriages were all going spare and all convertible. Even the Bluebirds, the self-propelled diesel railcars South Australian Railways turned out between 1954 and 1959, were pulled from traffic and eventually rebuilt as crew quarters. A vehicle designated P-Day 1 came out of Bluebird 253 in 2005 and went to work on transcontinental freight. Private companies including Pacific National, Aurizon, and SCT Logistics either inherited or bought these conversions and kept expanding the pool. Financially, it was obvious. Turning a redundant coach into sleeping accommodation cost a fraction of erecting relief facilities where none existed, and a fraction again of chartering aircraft to shuttle crews into desert airstrips. Number 2. Why the model does not transplant. So why not simply couple a rest van onto American freight trains and run the Australian relay system? The answer has several layers, and it begins with how the network itself is put together. Consider the sheer extent of it. Roughly 225,000 kilometers of route sit in the United States, much of it threading through or beside populated country already equipped with places to change crews. The Class 1 operators, BNSF, Union Pacific, CSX, and Norfolk Southern, run dense systems in which relief points typically sit a few hundred kilometers apart, close enough for a crew to finish a run inside 12 hours and step off at a terminal that is properly staffed. All of it exists already, paid for, and working. Even setting geography aside, bolting sleeping cars onto American trains would create fresh headaches. Each extra vehicle in the rake means more mass and more drag, and worse fuel figures. Occupied rolling stock has to satisfy Federal Railroad Administration standards, including crashworthiness rules written for passenger equipment. Labor would be another mountain. Existing collective agreements between the carriers and unions, such as the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers and Trainmen, rest entirely on the change point model, with rates of pay, seniority, and job allocation all anchored to named terminals. Moving to relay working would mean reopening every one of those agreements from scratch. Above all, there is no room for it in law. The Hours of Service Act counts time spent aboard a train in motion as time on duty, bunk or no bunk. That is not a drafting oversight. It expresses a settled position that somebody riding a train loaded with hazardous material through inhabited corridors should be treated as available to work, whatever they happen to be doing right then. Under American law, dozing in a berth as the consist rolls past somebody's back garden is not rest. Changing that would take an act of Congress to amend the statute. It would take the Federal Railroad Administration drafting a completely new safety framework. And it would take American railroading rewriting its entire approach to fatigue, moving from halting trains to rotating the people who run them. Number 1. The driverless question. Out in the Pilbara, in the northwest of Western Australia, this entire argument about sleeping vans and relay crews may already be sliding into irrelevance. Rio Tinto, the mining group, put $940 million into AutoHaul, the first fully autonomous heavy-haul railway anywhere. Since 2018, rakes of 3 locomotives and something like 240 wagons have been shifting 28,000 tons of iron ore, a trip over 800 kilometers of isolated desert track without a soul in the cab. Supervision comes from a control room in Perth, more than 1,500 kilometers removed. By 2025, the company was running as many as 53 of these trains at once across upwards of 2,000 kilometers of its own railway. People were not removed from the equation altogether. Controllers in Perth program each routing and follow progress via cameras mounted on the trains and streams of telemetry. Human drivers remain on strength as backup and take charge of the final run into the port. But the heart of the job, that long pull between pit and coast that once demanded relay crews asleep in a van, now happens with nobody riding at all. The system also did away with driving crews out to remote change points, cutting an estimated 1.5 million kilometers of road travel every year, which had been a genuine hazard in itself on unsealed outback tracks. American railroads have shown appetite for automation, but their road there is considerably harder. The United States does not operate a sealed private circuit between one mine and one wharf. It runs a shared public system, moving hazardous freight through residential streets and meeting road vehicles at over 130,000 level crossings. The obstacles, regulatory and industrial and safety-related alike, are immense. And so the two railways keep to their separate answers. Australia, with kilometer upon kilometer of empty corridor, invented the crew van to keep tonnage rolling across a landmass that offered nowhere to pull up. America, holding a thick web of terminals and 100 years of industrial agreements, built everything around bringing the train to a stand and exchanging the people on it. Neither one got it wrong. Each is a sensible reply to a completely different piece of country. The sleeping van crossing the Nullarbor tonight is not some superior idea the Americans stubbornly declined. It is a product of red dust, colonial blunders, and the blunt fact that for 1,600 kilometers in a straight line, there is nothing out there but flat ground and steel. The interesting question was never why Australia chose differently. The interesting question is whether, in an age of autonomous consists and remote control rooms, anybody will still need a bed behind the locomotives at all.